You've read it 4 times now. The message, the voicemail, the thing said across the kitchen at 11 at night. And each time you read it, you're looking for the same thing, a line. A line on one side of which is the illness, and on the other side is the person you love. Because if it was the illness, you can forgive it. And if it was them, as who they really are underneath everything, then maybe you have some thinking to do. But the line won't hold still. Some days it's obvious this isn't them. And some days a quieter, more frightening thought creeps in. What if this is who they are, and the diagnosis was just the excuse I needed to stay? I want to give you a way out of that loop today. Because you can't keep loving someone from inside a question you can't answer. Here's the twist most people never get told. It's almost never one or the other. It's usually both at the same time. And once you understand how they're both true at once, you get something far more useful than an answer. You get a test. 3 questions you can actually run that tell you where the illness ends and the character begins. Stay with me to the end, because there's a final question underneath all 3, the one that actually decides what you do next. And it is not, do they love me? It's something much more answerable than that. I'm Clara from Bipolar Clarity, and some of what I'll tell you comes straight from René, who created this channel and has lived this from the inside. He has been the one whose words someone else was rereading at 11 at night. Let's start with the mechanism, because it's the part that dissolves the whole illness or character trap. Picture a thermostat. Its whole job is to sense the room and hold it steady. A little cold, it nudges the heat up. A little warm, it eases off. That quiet, constant correcting is what a regulated mind does with mood all day long without you ever noticing. Now picture that thermostat breaking. Not the room changing, the sensor breaking. Now the smallest draft reads as a deep freeze, a patch of sun reads as a heat wave, and the system slams the response to the floor or the ceiling. The room hasn't changed much at all. The reading has gone wild. An episode is a broken sensor. It doesn't reach in and swap out the person's values or rewrite who they are. What it does is strip out the filter, the pause between feeling something and acting on it. The little voice that says, you don't actually mean that, let it go. Take that filter away and 2 things flood in. First, whatever is closest to the surface. Old fears, old resentments, the 3 a.m. thoughts everyone has and nobody says. And second, and this is the cruel part, total conviction. In an episode, the ugliest thing a person can think doesn't arrive as a passing thought they can dismiss. It arrives feeling like a truth. They've finally been brave enough to say. That's why it lands like a blow. It wasn't said carelessly. It was said with certainty, like the brakes were cut and the car went exactly where the road tilted. Here's how it feels from the inside. René has described it, and it's the part that's hardest to picture from the outside. When the filter drops, you don't feel unwell. That's the trap. You feel clear, like the fog everyone else is living in has finally lifted for you, and you're seeing the relationship and the person in front of you with a terrible new honesty. The thing you say isn't something you're choosing to be cruel about. It feels like something true you've been too polite to admit until now. And then the weather passes, and the clarity turns out to have been the symptom, and you're left holding words you'd give almost anything to unsay. So when you're on the receiving end, please know, the certainty in their voice was not a window into what they secretly believe about you. It was the sensor, reading a heat wave in a room that was only a little warm. So, is it the illness or is it them? The raw material was probably theirs. Most of us have a private drawer of unkind thoughts. But the conviction, the cruelty, the total loss of the filter that would normally keep that drawer shut, that's the broken sensor, both true. Now here's how you tell, in practice day to day, which one you're looking at. 3 questions. The first is time. Ask, does this show up only during episodes? Or is it there in the calm stretches too? This is the difference between a state and a trait. And it's the single most useful distinction I can give you. A state is weather. It rolls in, it's severe, and it rolls out. And when it's gone, the person is recognizably themselves again, often horrified at what the weather did. A trait is climate. It's just there in the good months and the bad, at the calm dinner and the tense one. If the coldness, the contempt, the carelessness only appears when sleep is shredded and everything is speeding up, and genuinely lifts when things settle, you're most likely watching a state. If it's the steady temperature of the relationship no matter what the mood is doing, that's a trait, and no diagnosis authored that. Watch across a full season, not a single storm. The second question is pattern. Does the behavior move with the illness or run on its own track? Real symptoms have a tide. They rise and fall with sleep, with speed, with the mood cycle. You can almost feel them coupled to it. So watch what the behavior is tied to. Does the harshness spike when the sleep collapses and the thoughts race, and ease when they rest? That tracks the illness. But if it appears on a perfectly stable Tuesday, aimed carefully, chosen for maximum effect, time to get a particular thing, that's not riding the tide. That's steering. Symptoms don't aim. People aim. Here's one clue that can help. And I want to be careful with it because it's easy to misread. Sometimes a symptom is indiscriminate. The episode spills onto everyone in range. You, the kids, the coworker, the stranger on the phone. The same story everywhere, and it embarrasses them later. And sometimes the harshness is oddly selective, warm and composed with the boss and the friends, saved sharply for you behind the closed door, where there's no witness and something to be gained. That second pattern can be a sign of steering. But go gently here, because closeness concentrates things too. The person nearest to someone in an episode often catches the worst of it simply for being nearest. You're the lightning rod, not because you were chosen, but because you were closest. So treat this as one signal among three, never a verdict on its own. Weigh it next to time and repair, not alone. And the third question is the one that matters most: repair. What happens after when the weather clears? This is where character actually shows itself, because everyone does damage in an episode. That's not the test. The test is what they do when they can see again. Do they turn and look at the wreck honestly? I said that. It was mine to say. It wasn't yours to carry, and I'm sorry. Do they try to make it right and take steps so the storm has less to work with next time? That's a person with an illness. Or does the diagnosis get reached for like a laminated card, flash to end the conversation, to make the harm disappear, to make you the unreasonable one for still being hurt? I was manic. You can't hold me to it. Use not as an explanation, but as a permanent pass. Here's the line, and I want you to hold on to it. An illness can explain a behavior. It can never be a person's whole excuse for the pattern of a life. Explanation looks backward to understand. Excuse looks forward to keep the door open for the same thing again. Put those together and you get something clean. A state plus decency in the repair equals a person you can build accountability with. The illness is real, and so is their ownership of it. A trait or a state with no repair ever is a different conversation, and it's one you're allowed to have. Which brings me to the thing I most want you to hear, because I know some of you have been quietly carrying it this whole time. Understanding is a gift you can choose to give. It is a real kindness, and it can change everything for the person you love. But understanding why a wave knocked you down does not obligate you to stand in the same spot and get knocked down again. Compassion and a boundary are not opposites. The healthiest love for someone with bipolar holds both at once. And there's a line none of this crosses. If you are ever afraid, if there are threats, if you're being hurt, that is not a symptom to be decoded, and safety comes first, before any of these questions. You'll find crisis and support lines for your country at the link in the description, whatever part of the world you're in. Put it in your phone now, not because tonight is the night, but because the worst moment is the wrong moment to start searching. So let's go back and answer the question underneath the question. The one that actually decides what you do isn't, do they love me? Love was probably never the thing in doubt, and it isn't reliable enough to steer by anyway. The real question is smaller and far more answerable. What are they doing with the illness? Not feeling about it. Doing. Because that you can see. You can watch it. Are they treating it as theirs to manage? The appointments kept, the sleep protected, the repair made when the sensor fails and does damage? Or are they handing you the diagnosis and asking you to carry it? Is it the bipolar or is it them was always the wrong question, because the honest answer is both. And both leaves you stuck. What are they doing with it? Is a question with a visible answer. And a visible answer is something you can finally act on. The sensor can break. That's the illness, and it's nobody's fault. What a person does about a sensor they know can break, whether they check it and reach for you honestly after it fails, that's the part that's theirs. And that's the part worth watching. If it helps to have this as something you can hold instead of carry alone, I send out a short, plain language note each week for exactly the people in your position. The ones doing the loving from the other chair. It's free, and the link's in the description. If this gave you a little more solid ground to stand on, subscribe. We're building a calm, honest library for the people who love someone through this. Your next step is right here on the screen. It's the one I'd point every partner and parent to first. I'll see you there. And be as gentle with yourself as you're trying to be with them. You're carrying something real, too.